afternoon. It's wonderful to have Hugh Campbell here with us today. And Hugh has quite a long history and a career in the in Hortgro, in the deciduous fruit industry, on the Hortgro Science side. And we'd love to hear a little bit more from you. And thanks for joining us, Hugh.
Great pleasure. Yeah. So
Yes.
what do you want to hear about?
Well, I think there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
I think a good way to start is just, introduce yourself. Dewald's got a lovely expression. He always says to people, when you meet someone at a braai and they say, "Wie is jy en wat doen jy?" Tell us a little bit about your history.
Right.
For the few that don't know.
Yes,
For the few that don't
know.
Well, I think that my kids always say, "Well, Hugh, what do you actually do?" Or, "Dad, what do you actually do?" I generally say, "Well, I talk to people." So a lot of what I've done over the last 25, 26 years has been facilitation. So using groups of people, individuals, to actually achieve outcomes. So maybe a bit of background. Didn't grow up on a farm, grew up in Cape Town. Arrived in Cape Town eventually. And ended up doing agriculture for various reasons. I thought that it would be a good diversity of skills that were required, that interested me. So after the army, went to the University of Stellenbosch, had a BSc in agriculture, finished in 1979, had a bursary from the Department of Agriculture and did 1 year and 6 days. I always say it was 6 days too many. But it was a good experience in those days to understand what the Department of Agriculture or what government did. Remember, that's 1980. And then I applied for at an international work exchange program and spent 2 years in the States, 1 year in Michigan, 1 year in slightly less than a year in Oregon on the two largest cherry and apple farms, but mostly cherry, getting ground work experience, and still in contact with both families. Both families have been out to South Africa. I visited them a few times. Then I spent a year in the UK, decided I wasn't going to go into agriculture because there you just wear gumboots the whole time. And worked in various things, wine bar, travel around, and then eventually decided it's time to come back.
What an incredible youth experience!
Yeah,
and I mean, working on farms like you mentioned, that must have given you incredible insight into the whole business of farming and the whole, as you say, you saw it and decided primary agriculture not for you.
Well, no, I mean, I was in primary agriculture for 14 years. So I farmed for 14 years when I came back.
Sorry, we hadn't got to that part yet.
Yeah. So, having not grown up on a farm, I needed to get practical, hands-on experience. So I labored. I labored for 2 years, did supervision of staff, but drove tractors, picked up rocks, pruned trees, in Michigan in the middle of winter, going out on a snowmobile, pruning cherry trees with a pole saw. Did all of that. So I got my good farming experience, and then I worked, came back, worked for Anglo-American farms at Boschendal, Rhodes Fruit Farms for 4 years, and then I had the extraordinary opportunity of developing Vergelegen. So I spent 10 years at Vergelegen and was part of a young, skilled team that developed a farm on the edge of town, 3,000 hectares on the edge of town. So that was a really extraordinary experience. So from digging proefgate, 1,000 proefgate, planting, so we did it from scratch. Put in a drainage system, mapped the soils, put roads on the soil division so that your irrigation blocks were on similar soils. And Vergelegen is blessed with beautiful soils. 129.
That's Vergelegen in Somerset West.
Somerset West,
Yes.
Yeah, so built the winery. So I eventually was the estate manager there. And then deregulation happened in 1997, which provided new opportunities. And that's where I took up the challenge of being, at that stage, DFPT, Deciduous Fruit Producers Trust, first outside employee. Anton was there with the SAPA team. So there were 5 of them. I was the 6th person, the first person to be employed outside that. And that was in 1998. So that takes me to the beginning stages of Hortgro. At that stage, it was DFPT, Deciduous Fruit Producers Trust. Yeah, so there
What
we go.
an incredible story. I mean, I met you when you were at Hortgro. I didn't know about all the stuff.
Yeah.
I remember you mentioning that you'd been in the States.
Yeah.
I remember that. But wow, what a story. So all of that, all the stuff that you did before you got to Hortgro really gave you the experience and the knowledge of the industry that people can't say, no, you don't know what you're talking about. You actually do. You walk the walk.
So I think that so I started off as industry manager, with Anton, and the portfolio changed fairly quickly because the research was almost the most important thing at that stage. It was being run by Cape Span at that stage, so Martin Taylor was running it. And so I took that over. So they decided that, in addition to these other duties, that needs to be your focus. And then realized that, in fact, it needed to be a dedicated focus. So it was myself that started, and then we appointed your leader as an assistant, secretary, basically. For 2 years, that was in Paarl. And then I moved over to Stellenbosch to join Hortec. So we kind of combined the research management side with what Richard Herndl was doing on the maturity indexing.
Okay. So quite a journey. And the science side of something like a producer organization is so important. People think the fruit grows, so what do you need science for? So tell us a little bit about what people say. As you say, your kids ask you, so Dad, what you do? And you say you talk to people. I think you do a little bit more than that.
Yeah. So the evolution of Hortgro Science started basically with myself and an assistant. Richard Herndl was in the same office, so he was an important part of the process. When DFPT started, it was a voluntary levy. And so that was 1998. And the idea of the growers was that, we don't want to be told what to do. We want to manage the process ourselves. And what kind of happened after a while is the further you were away from Stellenbosch, from the kind of epicenter, the less invested the growers were in a grower organization. And after 2 years, we had a situation where basically people didn't want to pay the levy. And Anton will tell you that the large co-ops assisted within that process to provide buffer funding, which was paid back. And we went through a process then of applying for the statutory levy. I think the table grape industry and the stone fruit industry felt that a statutory levy was required. And the pome fruit industry came in after that. So we had 1 year where there was no actual levy. And one of the aspects that catalyzed the process and convinced growers that a statutory levy was important was research. And it was basically a presentation that was said, well, listen, guys, if the industry doesn't contribute to research, it's not going to happen.
Yep.
And that was the reality. After that, and that wasn't the only aspect, but that was one of the key aspects where growers realized that we actually do need a research to underpin the work that we're doing. And if you look at countries like Chile for a very long time didn't have a research base. And they built the industry on borrowed information. Prof. Don was one of the people that helped the Chilean industry quite a lot in terms of technical expertise. They got technical expertise mostly from the States. And they built their industry to a great extent on that, but it's to an extent it's like building an industry on sand. So you do need those pillars. You need that that level of investment in research and access to technical people, particularly if you're talking market access. But that's another story that we can move into. So yeah, so I think, once those pegs were put in the ground, they realized that they do need to have a statutory levy. Research was I think at that stage, 70%. At this stage, it's gone down because there's so many other aspects that have been added to Hortgro and the need to have services that are not being provided by other sources. So growers recognizing that they need to look after their own interests.
But there must have been an inflection point, or like somebody would say, a come to Jesus moment, where people realized this is actually something must have happened where they said, we now understand why this is needed.
Yeah, so I think it was actually just laying the cards on the table and saying that these are the realities, because at that stage the ARC, which is Agriculture Research Council, was the major source of research, and the ARC went through a process in the 90s where they looked to how do we kind of commercialize the agriculture researchers, because at that stage it was all funded by government. And that's where they went through the process of saying, well, and the universities also looked at it, we will pay for using the government parliamentary grant to cover the salaries of staff, salaries and infrastructure. But industries will have to then come to the fore and start paying for the operational costs of a project. And eventually we got to almost a 50-50. Initially it was 70-30, 30% was paid by industry and 70% by the parliamentary grant, and that has migrated to 50%. So the reality there was that you needed to put your money on the table to leverage the other funding.
Okay.
At the university, the salaries and staff were paid for everything by the government or by the university, and that's also kind of moved. So I think that if you talk about what kind of catalyzed that, was the realization that if you don't put money on the table, you're not going to get anything back. Okay. And at that stage, if I look at the year 2000, 70% of the research budget went to the ARC. If you look at it now, just as an example, 2%.
Wow.
So that's the transition that has taken place. And research funding follows capacity. So if the capacity isn't there, the funding doesn't go there. You don't just give money because you feel you need to support an institution. So you don't support institutions, you support researchers. And I think that that's one of the fundamental lessons that one needs to learn. And theoretically, the government should be supportive. And if you look at other countries, you look at Europe, most of the research funding is actually funded by government. And I think if you look at organizations like Hortgro, they're not unique. I mean, Washington State has a fairly well organized, but I think one underestimates the level of organization that we have within South Africa. So with Hortgro, with SATI, with CRI, which is in the very privileged position of having substantial funding. And that was also a decision that was made by growers, where they doubled their levy to a great extent on the research side. So so research, I think, within any of the grower organizations is the sort of the foundation. But there's so many other things that have been plonked on top of that, driven out of need, and a lot of them are market access driven and are commercially driven in terms of on the marketing side. So, those are the other services that kind of came into it and play a fundamental role within Hortgro.
Okay, well, thank you. That was incredibly interesting the way you put it out. And I mean, those were difficult years. Things were shifting. Things were changing. It was like a seismic shift, and everybody had to adjust to that and put it together after that. So it took time. But if you today were to, for people listening who might not know, what are the fields of research that Hortgro Science kind of takes on? What are the main directions?
Yeah. Okay. So if we look back to those early years where 70% of the funding went to the ARC, on the stone fruit side, 80% of the funding actually went to the breeding program. So breeding was a fundamental pillar, and that was at the ARC. And so that was in the early 2000s. The whole, evolution of private breeding companies, as you know, has grown tremendously. And so if you look at now, the industry doesn't fund a breeding program. And we went through a couple of difficult processes in terms of making that decision from 2017, 2019, where the industry decided to actually withdraw from funding the breeding program and focus its energy on independent evaluation. That was the evolution of ProVar.
Yeah.
In terms of saying, well, there's so many breeding programs out there internationally. They used to be funded by government, and that shift has taken place. There is still a key role for research taking place in terms of breeding programs at government institutions, because that's where a lot of the innovative stuff also comes out. So that was a shift. If you look at where we were, the key focus is now, if you talk to Vian, who's heading up Hortgro Science, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, we had almost a split between post-harvest, crop protection and crop production. And the shift has been now very much towards crop protection, because the big challenge that we have in industry, one, is driven by market access. So meeting the requirements of your importing market. So we've got a very strong team on the market access side, and they've developed Phyla, which is a dedicated plant looking at the interaction between the product, so the post-harvest side, and entomological management, so looking at post-harvest treatments in terms of cold sterilization, in terms of fumigation. And a decision was made by our boards a number of years ago to actually develop that capacity on site. So that's at the university. So on the post-harvest side, a strong connection with Stellenbosch University. We've actually got a chair in post-harvest science, which is Dr. Elke Crouch, where the industry co-funds that position. On the production side, on the horticultural side, also a shift to a great extent away from the ARC. And, industry requires the services that an ARC provides. So the fact that the industry is not funding research at the ARC is almost a reflection on, as I said earlier, in terms of the capacity that's available. But that's your kind of more applied type of research. And, at one stage we had 15 people seconded to the university. So in the early 2000s, we actually made a strategic decision from an industry's point of view, is that we need to develop capacity within the university for two reasons. One, you're looking at outputs in terms of research outputs. But one of the key aspects in terms of research is the development of people. So there was the opportunity of developing the next generation of technical people and researchers. And the third one is that, to a great extent, investment in research is an investment in people. You're developing people who are creating the opportunity of solving your problems. So old Louis van Brumsen, who used to be at CRI, who was one of our directors and one of the mentors that I had, always used the concept of a fire station. And we've used this a lot. So every industry needs a fire station. Okay. It needs a fire station of technical people who have the capability of addressing technical needs that pop out. And they need firemen. fire women as well, in the generic sense.
Personnel.
Yeah, personnel, let's use that, who then have the ability to address issues as they come up. And if you look at the post-harvest things, and if you talk to someone like Henk Grissel, who's at Hugh Cape, who's been in the industry for years, is a great stalwart of the industry. You know, he would like to have, ideally, a collection of PhDs sitting around him, because every season there's a challenge. And is how do you address that challenge? And first of all, you look at your resources and you say, well, we've got this issue, and based on your knowledge, how can we address it? So, and that, as we look into the future, is becoming one of our big challenges, is that applied research capacity, because it's not as sexy as it used to be a professor at the university. So if you look at a lot of the technical people, once you get an MSc, you're employable. You're employable by technical departments, by exporters. You're employable by the chemical companies. You don't need to get a PhD. I think the last time we got a South African with a PhD was in horticulture, applied horticulture, was Louise van Schoor in 2006.
What?
So most of the
Wow.
PhDs that have graduated in horticulture have been either Zimbabwean or some other African country.
Wow.
So, I mean,
And they obviously go back to their country.
well, a lot of them go back to the country, but, you know, for a lot of Zimbabweans here, you get a bursary, so you get funding, and you hopefully find a position within South Africa. So, I mean, the industry developed. We were looking for. Well, we captured Corin Tron, Professor Corin Tron, at one stage was looking to move. She was, in fact, looking to move into another industry, and we said, "No, my good heavens, we can't do this." And I know myself and Peter Dewald and the dean of the faculty at that stage. Well, let's put together a package to keep the expertise that we require to serve our industry, and we created a chair in pre-harvest applied horticulture, and Corin held that post for 10 years. And part of her objective was to develop the next generation. And we created then a prestige bursary where we identified someone in third year, so a strong student, and we offered them the prestige bursary, which was better than a normal bursary, with the objective that they would go on to do a PhD. And Brodie, who was one of our first, and as part of that process, we said, well, we need to have mentorship for this person. So the academic mentorship was provided by the university, her study leader, but we need to expose her to the industry. And that's where we contracted, at that stage, Anton Miller. And once a month, Anton would take Brodie out with him when he went and visited his growers, which gave her that kind of exposure, because we were looking for a well-rounded student. And at the end of the MSc, they then had the option of going to do a PhD. We preferred that, but it wasn't a prerequisite. And Brodie then decided, no, she wants to go into the applied field and the technical field. But in the process, we had identified you need to have a stream of people coming through. So we've identified someone who's now registering for a PhD.
Oh, wow. That's
So
exciting.
and it's a long-term project, you know.
20 years on.
Well, exactly. So if you listen to one of the great horticulturists at the industry, Professor Jacobs, he always said it takes 8 years to develop a researcher once they've got a PhD.
Wow.
So the reality of the research environment is that it's a continuous and a long-term investment in people. So once they've got their PhD, you know, they've focused on a very narrow field, and you know, so you want to then develop them in that field and then broaden that. So So after 8 years, then they really are value. So this is where you're talking about someone who's sort of now already reached 40.
Yes.
And so you want to keep that person within the industry.
It's like developing new cultivars. It takes just
No,
as long.
exactly. And if you look, and this is the other side of the research portfolio that people don't recognize, and we did an analysis. Karen Tron looked at the graduates out of horticulture. If you just look at horticulture, you've done it in the other fields as well. And what happened to those people, because they tracked them. And there was a 70 to 80% return back into the industry. And so if you've done a master's in a certain subject, you've done it on, something within apples, that becomes your thing that you can then get a job in that. So that to an extent holds those people within the industry. And once they've been captured to a great extent, they stay with industry. But if you look at the sort of the new generation, the 40 to 50-year-olds now who serving at 2 a day at exporters at the different most of those were people who did a master's degree funded by industry, because we give bursaries to the university. Mm-hmm. So our system is one where for every project that's done at the university, and the university is now our biggest investor in terms of research, part of that is then a bursary for a student. We don't prescribe who the student needs to be. We leave that to the university because they want to have the leverage. And then, so they would get a student that we would then fund. And for them, it's kind of cheap labor. That's what they consider.
Yeah.
But it's a dual purpose. So on average, the industry funds between 25 and 40 bursaries a year.
Oh, wow.
Sure.
So, if you look at that...
Is that just Hortgro?
That's just Hortgro. And if you spoke to CRI, you would most probably have the same thing. They do that through the Citrus Academy, but it's based on research. So there's a pipeline of people that are coming through, and that is the, so a lot of the things that happen behind the scenes, when you say, well, what does Hortgro Science do, is the interaction with the university. And we've just been through a strategic process. So every 4 years, they review their strategy. And so I was contracted, because I'm not employed at this stage by them, to assist with the strategic process. I facilitated the meetings, and I interviewed I did about 60 hours of interviews, where I interviewed the researchers on the one side, and I interviewed the technical people, who are the people who interface to a great extent with Hortgro Science. Then I interviewed a whole bunch of growers. And just to get a perspective in terms of the users,
Must have been incredibly insightful.
Yeah, it was, and to a great extent, there were comments made by technical people who travel around the world, is that, Hortgro Science's systems and the way they operate is world-class. And if you talk to researchers from other industries, for instance, Europeans, they don't have the kind of interaction with industry, because they get their funding from government, and they research what they find interesting.
They go down their little wormhole.
Exactly. Whereas Hortgro Science is funded by growers, and I mean, we have a basic principle of saying, he who pays says. So it's all driven by the needs of the grower. So my opening thing is facilitation. So to a great extent, what Hortgro Science does facilitates the linkage between the research, the technical people who become the conduit of the information, and the growers. And in a year, there's an interaction between, and we use around about 200 people are involved in that process. So it's not just the little core of people employed by Hortgro Science. There's layers of people that are utilized within the process. So what was evident from the interviews was that most growers, and I spoke to quite a few leading growers, they know that Hortgro Science is there, they go to the symposium, but they don't know the inner workings of what Hortgro Science does. They just want to know that it's there, that there's researchers that are looking at their problems, and if they have a problem, there's someone that can address it. And I in the year 2010, we went through a bit of a transformation where we were challenged by the technical people, particularly on the palm fruit side, saying that we weren't linked enough with industry. And I use the click thing. You know, if you talk to a grower, generally, if you're talking about fruit fly and you click your fingers, there should be a face that pops up. You know, in those days it was Brian Barnes. If it was codling moth, Tom Bloomfield or Matthew Addison, you know, that's the kind of linkage that they have. You know, so there's someone there that Wolf Schwaber was our fusey expert. You know, and you know, as far as they're concerned, that's as long as there's someone who's looking at the problems, that's fine. The challenge that we have now is that, and in certain industries, I was talking to Vian about one of the other industries that he's, the macadamia industry, let's just talk about it, saying, well, we've got funding, but we don't actually have researchers to address the problems. So if we look into the future...
Because it's quite, is that because it's quite new?
No, I think look, there's 72 or 70 whatever thousand hectares of macadamians now. It's new in this in South Africa.
Yes.
You know, that's double what we've got on apples and pears and stone fruit. But it is a reality in terms of not enough people going into science, into research on the applied side. So yes, you can have all these sexy new technologies, but you still need a technologist. You still need someone who can integrate that into what's happening on the ground. Because apple trees are planted into the soil.
Sure.
And there's people that prune them, there's people that thin them, there's people that pick them. And it's all about doing the right thing at the right time. So it'll be very difficult in the type of business that we're in to take people out of it. You can put technology into it, and that can fill quite a lot of the gaps. So yeah, as we look into the future on the research side, I have no doubt that we as industries are going to have to work together more, because nowadays every industry wants to have its own people, because it's easier.
Yeah, and the same pest that affects an apple affects a citrus fruit, affects a
Exactly.
grape. It's all the same thing.
So, but you know, so from an industry point of view, you want, if you want work done today, you want work done today.
Yes.
So we're going to have to make sure that we have a system, and that's what the ARC did, exactly as you said. That was a facility, but the ARC was also focused. You had Infratech, which was focused on fruit, deciduous fruit. You had Nitwa Bay, that was white. So there's still specialization within that, and so we're going to have to move towards more, as you say, pest specialists. And
so listening to this, and it's very interesting, because that's before my time that I've been in the industry, and we work a lot with CRI and see what they are doing.
Yeah.
So ARC is still there,
right.
but it's almost like as if they're not there. But
I don't want to agree with that. Yeah, but yeah.
Okay.
But from an industry's perspective, in terms of serving the specific needs of the deciduous fruit industry, there are a handful of people that we utilize. But if you talk generally, you're right.
So my question is there a gap, like in anywhere else in South Africa where state entities has gone in a privatized way? Is there a gap in South Africa for a fruit industry research private entity where an FCM specialist can be, who can talk on macadamias as well as on citrus, on palm fruit. Do you think that there could be something like that?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, let's just take Experico. Now, Experico grew out of Cape Span, and if you go back to the origin of Experico, Unifico Research Services was developed in the early 90s to address the post-harvest applied field. So you had your kind of scientists looking at the sort of the sciences. They were looking at the sort of the applied stuff in between, and that's where Martin Taylor started. They in fact started in the faculty of horticulture at Stellenbosch University, and then they were taken out. And when at deregulation, Cape Span made a decision that strategically there was value for them to have them inside their firemen inside their own enclave, because they were there to address their problems, and they recognized the value of that. And then it got to a point where they said, well, and that was part of the evolution of the industry, where they became more international and all sorts of things, that they couldn't justify employing them, and that's where they then shifted out. And then they got private investors. So Experico is a private company. And it's quite extraordinary, in fact, that they've managed to maintain themselves in a private capacity. So we've got Experico that basically looks after the post-harvest. So that's one of our stalwarts. Then Provar was initiated to look at the inspection of new cultivars, evaluation of new cultivars. And also that out of that, so we were doing the evaluation of, used to be at the ARC, we took it upon ourselves, we employed someone to do of rootstocks, independent evaluation of rootstocks, which has always been an internal thing. And then we migrated that then to Provar, and that's one of their, so that was almost their research, still evaluation, but more on the research side. And they're kind of to an extent, so they're employing postgrad horticulturists that have, so they've kind of landed there. So what's actually happened is that on the applied research horticulture side, Provar is actually filling that gap. On the post-harvest side, Experico is filling that gap. So you look at those two entities, and we've got one or two people that are positioned at the university. And, you know, to me, those need to evolve into some kind of loose arrangement. It doesn't necessarily mean for us as industry to take them over, because there's value in having these independent things. Because so in the old days of Experico, when I was more directly involved, we were about 20% of their funding, but their people were being developed by all these other projects that they were doing, private projects, but they were developing people. And when you contract someone to do work, is because of their knowledge that they've developed over a number of years, over numerous different projects. That's how they add value. So if you want to develop a researcher, fund them. It's very simple. They're not going to develop by themselves. And if you don't fund them, someone else is going to fund them, and then they're going to go off and start working on blueberries, or they're going to start working on everything else. So, and that's where, if you look at our relationship with Stellenbosch University, we used to be in Dorp Street, our offices used to be in Dorp Street. And one of the processes that we catalyzed was to say, well, they've got facilities at Vergelegen, should we not move there? So we were the first tenants there, and we actually put funding down to develop it. And for 5 years, we got paid back on that. We managed to get CRI there, so Vaughan moved there. We tried to get the wine tech there, but they were fairly entrenched in Paarl. But that was the vision, to bring them all together. So you have all these industries together. And we went through various processes, decision-making processes now relating to FILO, which is this post-harvest market access thing. And it was developed in the Scarpskeer, which we developed into Entomon, which was our cereal insect codling moth plant, which then evolved into what was philo. So that's part of that evolution. And now with the university, they're moving their agricultural department to Vergelegen.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that's part of a whole new development. Is now all of a sudden they want to knock down the scarpschuur and knock down our philo. So Vian has negotiated that be built. So we're building a new facility there. So the question then is, where do you have your facility? Do you have it on your own property? We could have put it elsewhere. Or are you looking at this kind of collective thing? So just linking in with your question. So I visualize in the future, and that, and this is very much the vision of Professor Dani Brink, who's the current dean. They've just appointed a new dean he retires at the end of this year. Is pulling industries into the university, so you get this kind of symbiotic relationship. And if you look at quite a lot of the research facilities overseas, Vian and them have been to Spain. They have quite a lot of independent companies who are part of it. So they share certain facilities, and you have then a place where you can train students. So if you take philo, for instance, there's that's an opportunity for training students, but we are in control of it. Yeah. So there is always this tension in terms of who's in control. But I visualize as we go forward that will then be a collection, not necessarily one company, but a collection of industries. The chemical industry is also, there's common ground in the middle. Yes. Here is where do you find that common ground? And if we say that the limited item is then the researcher, is how do you build a mechanism that supports that? So, I mean, if you look at the opportunity that CRI was created by them doubling their fund, they could then appoint critical people. Yeah. And they've got a very flat structure where there's critical people that are populated there. And they have then specialists that work with the universities and everyone else, but they have a custodian. They have the click person. So there's a click person for fruit fly. There's a click person for FCM. There's a click person for what they perceive to be key areas. Yes. And so that's looking up from a grower's perspective, from an industry perspective, in terms of what is your key capacity that then can access other capacity. But that then becomes your conduit through which you access the other information. And what's happening then is you building capacity within that person. So you can't afford that person to leave. So part of what has also been recognized, I think, within the CRI system is that you've got to build a second layer and you've got to build a third layer. And that's where your technicians then, instead of just being technicians, become researchers, that you can evolve into MSc that can then become the future conduit.
Yeah, because with a lot of the extension people we work with, they've got doctorate degrees and they've got masters in certain things that they apply in their field that they then work in.
Yeah.
Wow, that was incredibly well set out and explained. Yes, it's an hour.
It's an hour.
It's nearly an hour. Nearly an hour.
Yeah.
You don't sound like a retired person.
No. No. And maybe just a note on that is when I turned 65, which is 3 years ago, the shock to me was, so this is what a person who is destined to retire feels like. And you think, my goodness, I'm not ready to retire, and it's this archaic thing of the concept of retirement that was developed back in Germany.
When life expectancy was 40 years old.
No, it was 68. Yeah, you see, so they gave them 3 years to kind of relax before they die. But I think so the challenge I think that we have for a lot of people who are exiting and creating space. You've got to create space for the next generation. Yeah. I'm not challenging that at all, but there's a very unique space within most businesses for people who who don't, their kids have graduated, they've paid off their, they have slightly different needs. Yes, they would like to earn income because the realities that we all face, but they want to be useful, they want to be challenged, and they don't want to be the MD. They don't want to be the general manager, but they want to contribute. So I think that, you know, there's a very real space, and it needs to be managed. You don't want to feel a spare part, and you don't want to be seen as a spare part. Ooh, yes, is jy nog steeds hierso?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and also there's a time. There is a time. But if you shift it into something else where you're contributing, and you're contributing to your own ecosystem, and you're contributing to the greater ecosystem, that's really value add. And I mean, I've been doing some mentoring and stuff like that, and it's incredibly rewarding because you actually have time to spend time with people that have a gap, and you can fill that gap. So I've. Yeah.
Wonderful. I would like to say that
Kali
Skuman, we had the opportunity to interview him, and he's a very interesting guy. And he came up with, he said, there's 3 parts of life. There's learn, there's earn, and there's return.
Yeah.
And he said he is now in the return years, and he's in his early 70s.
Yeah.
And as you say, there's this incredible life of knowledge and experience that you have, and some industries will just want to sweep you out the door when you turn 65. But if you have the opportunity to be there and give back and do what you're doing now, it's such a win-win situation.
The bad part about it is, and I can see this changing in the next 30, 40, 50 years, the next generation, because everything's online now. You can have so many videos of yourself online that your grandchildren and their grandchildren will even know what their lineage was. The people in your position didn't have that.
Yeah.
It's a foreign concept for most people that's at retirement age, is to leave that you could become immortal, technically.
Well, I have
like
actually,
that, eh?
no, I mean, we're actually doing a training program that I've been involved with in terms of just talking people through how do you do a budget. Very simple thing, just budget. What is a financial statement?
Can I enroll in that, please?
but from a grower's point of view, in other words, as a farmer, what do I need to know?
Yeah.
And how do I do a budget? And working with people who've been in the business for a long time, but they've always had someone else do it. So actually just sitting alongside and saying, okay, well, let's just, snoei, wat doen jy? Hoeveel mense gebruik jy? You know, just, and empowering people in terms of that. And that's been very rewarding. So we're capturing those little lessons. Yeah.
But even for something as simple as that, is that to double check the person that's doing that, to see if they are not, to call it what it is, bullshitting you.
To know,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
it's what do you need to understand?
Yes.
So if you've got a financial statement and you own a farm, or you're the MD of this farm or whatever, so what does that mean? And what do I need to know? And you know, just not what the accountant needs to know. What do I need to know as an operator?
It is as somebody said to us, you often you get people that come in, they are sons or that take over the business. You are now coming in, they've got maybe an agricultural degree or whatever, but they know they're going to take over the father's farm. They're actually stepping into a multi-million rand business with no business experience.
No, exactly.
So they would just, if the chemical advisor says you need to spray this because your neighbor is spraying it, they just say, oh, thank goodness, bring the stuff.
That's another conversation that I can have with you.
That is an incredible conversation.
but they were never trained
No,
to
exactly.
be. Yet it's these massive businesses, but they need that business understanding.
Yeah.
I have a question, and that is Hortgro and science. Those two words put together. Hortgro being for the industry body for the deciduous industry, and science being what science is. Research and development. People who are not involved in the industry maybe do not understand that. I always think of it in terms of the fruit we can buy in the shop now versus the fruit that was available in the shop, say, 50 years ago. How different it is. People looked at fruit that you can see now, and what did that fruit look like before all the development and all the changes have happened? Have you got a comment on that?
Well, I suppose the question is what has changed, and has a lot changed.
How has science changed things also?
Well, I think to a great extent, if we look at it from an applied science, from a grower's perspective, what science has done has helped us stay in business and keep up. And if you look at, for instance, just a very simple thing, and I'll use Apple as an example, is if you looked at what the break-even tonnage was way back then, was most probably 30, 40 tons. And now you're most probably looking at 65, 70. And what has changed? What has changed is that the ability to produce more fruit, better fruit that the market wants. So a lot of the science that we do is catch up, and solving problems. It's addressing, and if you look at transformational things like, for instance, if you take something like the Pharrell project, the early marketing of Pharrell, and that was built on science, whereas before we would have to wait 12 weeks and then only market your Pharrells after that. Now, utilizing science and technology, we can actually, by doing certain things, we can market much earlier. And so in other words, you've created a whole kind of gap. So yeah, there are a multitude of examples in terms of where science has helped. And a lot of it relates to a basic understanding of the basic physiology of a plant. And I think a lot of what's missing within quite a few export companies is where you get people in who are marketing fruit, but they don't necessarily understand the integrity of the fruit. So it's a lot of what we do is actually just problem solving, addressing those issues. And if we look at market access, which is most probably one of the most important aspects, with Lindy and her team, we've got 6 or 7 people focused on that aspect. And how do we overcome the barriers that the international market is placing on us so that we can sell our fruit? So just as an example, if you get one codling moth in a batch, as we had with Thailand, that entire Taiwan, the industry was closed. So how do you develop technologies and systems to ensure that you don't get to a point where you potentially have a codling moth in a fruit? So a lot of it is problem solving in our context. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. You did.
It's a fire station working hard. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a very realistic answer. And I mean, where would the industry be without the problem solvers, without the fire station? So you are doing a very important job.
And if you don't know that it's a problem, you simply don't know. You can't solve a problem if you don't know that it's a problem.
Yes, you
so
don't have the knowledge.
It's got to rear its head first before you can.
Yeah.
It's like the fire station. There needs to be a fire for a fire station to work.
So it's interesting. One of the growers said, "Well, what's the biggest value to you of Hortgro Science?" And he said, as a grower, he's out in the field all the time. It's the opportunity to be stimulated and to think differently. And challenge. So when you get into a room with a specialist who's delving into the aspect that you're managing on, say, on a superficial level, at an in-depth level, it provokes, for him anyway, it provokes his mind. And that to him was one of the big values, is hulle laat my dink. Which I think is an important aspect, which
very important.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this: you obviously clearly work with a lot of students that's coming into the industry. are you excited about what's coming?
No, absolutely. I mean, it's if you go to a Hortgro symposium, Hortgro Science Symposium, this is now going back to the good old days of the Capomology Association, the CPA, the annual symposium. The one aspect that always, if you're on the stage looking back, and I think I've made this comment virtually every year, is one's always astounded by the number of young people there are. So that's not necessarily students, that's young people within the industry.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so important to make sure that you continuously focus on the pipeline. And in previously, it het nou van self gebeur. It just happened. Now it's actually a managed process. If we're wanting to develop a post-harvest horticulturist, we need to actually start tracking that process and identifying people and pushing them through the pipeline. And you're not necessarily going to get them all landing, but as long as there's people going through the pipeline, they might end up with citrus or they might end up somewhere. And that's fine, because they'll come back and then, there's movement.
For the greater
But you've just got to make sure that pipeline remains full. And if you look at the number of people who apply for the Hortgro bursaries, this is the undergrad bursaries, it's astounding. Really? So a bursary is a catalyst, and quite a few people, particularly people coming from other industries, from other cultures, coming in, and you say, well, why did you study agriculture? She says, I got a bursary. So that just, that was just the door that opened. It happened to be an agricultural door because there was a bursary.
Yes.
But don't underestimate the power of that.
No, it's fundamental.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
We need to get more school pupils exposed to this.
Yeah.
I'm looking at my own kids. Mine is still in primary school. And I think if you go into most high schools, unless it's a Boland Landbou or one of these agricultural high schools, if you go in there and you say to them, if you start talking about agriculture, they have got no idea what's happening.
And agriculture, with the new technologies that have come in, has become much more attractive.
Oh, yes.
Because there's this fantastic overlay of technologies. And I mean, if you look at the different departments that are getting involved in research, there's engineering, there's, with AI, there's a whole new dimension that has come in. So what's also happening is you're having people coming in with a mechanical engineering that all of a sudden, are connecting with because you've got to land somewhere. Your technology has got to land somewhere. You've got to use it for something.
Yeah.
So if you don't, so you need it from both sides. You need people with the integrity, the understanding of the product, connecting with the technologists, and that interface is a very exciting interface.
Extremely, and we are seeing a lot of that. The field, the areas that we move, how much of that technology is being used, and as you say, it's hugely exciting. But it needs to be communicated down to school level to say, agriculture is not what the traditional picture is that is sketched to you. So it's very exciting.
But often that only happens when somebody has been exposed to it, which often happens at a postgraduate level only, that they get experience of new technologies and drip irrigation, or they want to become an engineer, but the market is flooded. Yet you need an engineer to build a pack house.
But what's intriguing is when you get an engineer interrogating the horticultural practice. Okay. So asking the questions about pollination. So how does pollination work? Because the engineer is saying, well, how can I design something that will address that? So you do thinning, so you remove flowers, but you also do pollination. So if I blow some pollen on, I'll pollinate. And which one do I want to pollinate? Which is the most important? Is it the king flower? So let's pollinate the king flower and let's blow the other ones off. So as they go through the evolution of the plant through its stages, they look at it from a completely different perspective. So when you get that kind of overlay and just different minds looking at the same problem, then you get real problem solving. So that's intriguing.
This is really cutting edge. It's exactly where it is, where people are looking taking old problems and looking at them with a new look, with new technologies, and being able to take it down the road. This is science.
Yeah.
And it's hugely exciting, and it's one of those things that if we could get this down to school level and get the message out there more, I think it would be very exciting. Have you got any last message? Okay, you're speaking to a very broad audience.
Yeah.
Is there anything in particular you would like to say about the field that you work in and have worked in going forward? Is there a message?
Well, there's different messages for different people.
Yes.
I've spent the last 3-4 years focusing on plant material and clean plant material. And I think there's the importance of actually starting right. So the concept of start clean, end clean is kind of a message that I would like to get out to the growers, and I think people understand that, and the impact of that potentially on what could be achieved. So that's kind of a work in process at the moment. So I'm still involved with the Plant SA and the certification scheme, and trying to get that to be completely functional. But yeah, maybe just I think you were looking for something slightly broader, is, agriculture is, I think the value of agriculture is that it's a real science. It's a real practical thing. And what is extraordinary, well, it's the same with everything, is that most people just, they see an apple or a bunch of grapes or whatever, and that's what they see. They have absolutely no idea what it gets to get there. And I mean, if you just take, you come from the table grape industry, the amount of times that each one of those bunches has been handled, thinned. If you're talking about nectarines, that every single shoot on that tree has been handled a few times. It's been thinned, it's been hand thinned, it's been picked, and on a tree there's, so it's the level of detail that goes into it. And in every single aspect, that level of detail has a depth behind it. So, whatever industry you're in, there's an incredible level of depth and knowledge that goes into that element of the process. So it's completely multi-layer. It's like an onion, to get to the kernel, you peel all these things off. So agriculture is wonderfully diverse, and that's why I went it in the first place. To me, it was a combination of a huge collection of skills, from engineering to finance to people, particularly if you're in the fruit industry. It's a people-orientated industry. There's a space for everyone within that. And on the outside, you don't think that there's a space on the inside, but once you get on the inside, you realize how many spaces there are. So I think it's a wonderful thing. I'm completely grateful that I have had the opportunity. And yesterday I was on a farm, and you look out, early morning, late morning, just the environment that you're in.
Absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
It's kind of better than mining, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or accounting.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hugh, wow. It's been incredible chatting to you. We have a tradition where the previous guest leaves a random question for the next guest.
Oh, gosh.
So it's like this wild card. And here it comes.
I've got two here that I've identified, but the question I'm going to take is, what is your favorite part of agriculture, which you literally just answered? So the next part of it, what's your least favorite part of working in the agricultural industry?
Look, for me, Eckes means that one of the biggest, what touches me is the incredible cross-section of people that I've been exposed to, from laborer to the Dean of Agriculture, to the rector, to the researcher, to the grower, and the kind of relationships that have been developed as a result of it, and the network that is developed, and the kind of friendships that have evolved out of that. So that's, in other words, what have I taken out of my 45 years of working in agriculture. I would say for Hugh Campbell as a person, because people is what pushes my button, that has been my top one. What is
The least favorite. You got it.
Remember, you're unemployed. You can say what you want now.
Yeah. No, I think the most challenging parts of my job have been this interplay between commercial and the kind of non-commercial. So we've operated as a grower organization, as a support to the commercial entity. But when you have the two in the same kind of mush, where the drivers are different, that has always been the most difficult element to manage. And I think from an industry's perspective, the industry, to keep itself clean and to keep itself whole, needs to stay out of the commercial entity, and support and underpin that, but don't get involved there where you're competing potentially with your own growers, whatever. So that to me has always been one of the more difficult sides. So that's looking at it in a sort of in the context of working in a grower organization. Yeah, I don't know.
That's a good answer.
Yeah. That's a good answer. Yeah,
And it's a very realistic.
Yeah.
answer.
I mean, everyone's challenged by that.
It is what it is.
And I mean, and every grower, every person, very often sitting around the table is sitting there with different hats on.
Yes.
Because our industry is so integrated, so vertically integrated too. You're an exporter, you're a nurseryman. Jy's 'n bietjie van alles. It's again, you've got to be principle based in terms of how you address these things. So you've got to look at the principles. So if you're sitting on a board, or you've got to look at it in context of what is my role there, and not how does it affect me in my personal business. And I think that's what differentiates your great directors from the others. And that's the challenge that everyone has when you're sitting on all these advisories or boards, whatever. Is this good for the industry, or is this good for me? And very often they both integrated. So you can't separate them. But when it comes to vote, where does my vote sit? Which will remain the challenge.
Wow.
Hugh, it's been incredible. Thank you so much for joining us. I think you're going to have to come back sometime, because I think we've got a lot more to talk about.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for joining us.
It's a great pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.